This will be a quick overview of the Quickdraw weaving program's primary view controls. Now, the most commonly used views are on the toolbar here, as well as everything is on the view controls. So before I walk through all of the views, let me take an aside for a second. Let me go back to the Quickdraw weaving webpage where you downloaded the software, which would be the first tab. The detailed index of program capabilities will walk through all of the various screens. This is a searchable document with linked videos that you can search through, see what's on a page. If you don't know where something is, you can search and find it, like a warp editor or color schemes. As you search this, you can figure out what all of the capabilities of Quickdraw are, how to get to them. So, knowing that is in the background, let me go back to the view menu. So the project setup screen tells me what pattern I'm working with and the path. I can select how many shafts I want, as well as how many treadles. When I set shafts, it will automatically set the treadling. I can then change that if I want to. Floating selvage will analyze the pattern in the main edit buffer. If it needs a selvage, it would tell me that. I have the ability of adding that and noting where those floating selvages are, as well as to delete unused shafts and treadles. And there's a built-in treadle reducer that would allow you to reduce the treadle count. I can select the multi-treadle or lift plans, and I can convert a tie-up to a lift plan back to tie-up here. The warnings, Quickdraw recognizes there's some things. For example, here I've got multiple threads in the same row, as well as the first thread matches the last. And disable those warnings. If I go back and notice, those messages are now gone. So that can be useful. It can help you prevent you making mistakes. If you're doing deliberately, you can just turn them off. I can ask for rising shed, falling shed looms. I recognize the difference between thread drafts and profile drafts, in that thread drafts will have things like how am I beating, how am I throwing shots, whether there's thread sizes and that kind of stuff, heddle counts. If I'm doing profile drafts, I do have an ability of doing profile block substitution as well as reverse block substitution on the threading here. The preferences on threading top, bottom, left, right allow me to set so that when I do a drawing, it actually comes from the bottom versus the top. And I have detail control over left, right, and what's on top and the bottom. The color palette controls are a separate video. There's a lot of capability here for selecting what colors and how I want to link threads to colors. The save as default template would say every time I hit a new function, that's where it would go with that number of threads, treadling, tie-up, that kind of stuff. The pattern notes would tell me whether there's notes and allow me a create editor to enter data. I can look for heddle counts, thread counts, float counts. Things like the thread counts can be very convenient. The copy to clip allows me to import that into Excel, which I use for yardage calculations, since there's a lot more people that know Excel than weaving software. The export as WIF allows me to stay with a very simple WIF format versus a expanded format, which may provide more capability in the long run. I also have tools for blending patterns and comparing multiple patterns so I can physically see what differences are. The main warp weft editor, talked about a little bit already. I have an ability of changing things like the tie-up. Whenever I select in the controls, it automatically will select the main screens. I can control thread rotations, sizes. I've got a very large number of tools that are on the control box here that I can manipulate. Again, a separate video will walk through all of those editor functions. A few multiple repeats of pattern would just show me multiple copies of that so I can see how the structure works. So that's the front of the fabric. I can also view the reverse of the fabric. You notice it's moved the treadling to the left-hand side so I can tell I'm looking at the back, as well as changing the tie-up markers to a falling shed loom since I'm looking at the back side of the fabric now. The Analyze pattern for floats is a very useful tool. It will highlight where the longest threads are. I can see what that is, and it shows me on the control box what they are. I can ask whether I want front or back, whether I want 1 or 2 repeats of the pattern. Since the longest float may be across from pattern to pattern, and you may not be doing multiple patterns. It's also convenient because I can add false colors when I set the threshold down. It will show me all the threads in red and orange, so I can see how prevalent that problem is in the pattern, whether it's a unique thread or whatnot. So there's a lot of capability there, as well as like the main editor. Once I'm a wharf down on the bottom will actually tell me match float. So there's a lot of ways to see the float counts in Quickdraw. Now the view finished is an interesting one, and it actually will show deflected weaves, double weaves, and so forth. So it's a fairly smart display tool to tell you what structures are in place and look for those deflections. Reverse side of the finish is a similar backside view, so you can see how the floats look differently there. The graphic entry of a pattern is probably the most capable display tools in Quickdraw. I can import a draft. If I clear the grid, I can import the draft from the main warp weft editor. I can edit that, save that back out to the main editor. I have symmetry control tools, which would allow me to do things like as I draw a pattern, it automatically will keep all those in place. I can also do things like create a very quick profile draft. And if I ask for the threading, I can go to the main block substitution menus. That would then show me that profile, what it would look like in each one of the weaving structures. So I can actually do those block conversions from there. I also have an ability of defining my own thread structures. I also have numerous structure libraries. I can do things like copy a structure, and when I go back to my undefined structure, I can then paint in that structure. I can also thread substitutions where each pixel here would be represented by a two-dimensional matrix. So I can create a large number of structures. I can actually layer so that I can create multi-layer cloth in complex structures. I can even change the aspect ratios on the screen as well as hide the control bars. So there's a lot of capability here on the grid view. New block substitution is similar from the grid. This would be from the main editor. It would be a way to get there. Again, the thumbnails show me what all the choices are. Modify substitution would look about the same, only if I was changing iterations. The network design tool, this one's based on Alice Schlien's process. I can select any initial I want. As soon as I draw a pattern line, as soon as I let go of the mouse click, it's immediately going to draw that pattern. I can select threadling keys, so I can select what I want. The ribbon tool allows me to do things like scroll that ribbon back and forth, and I can see what that does to the pattern. So it's a very powerful design tool. It's also available here. So that was Alice Schlien's tool. I also have some tools done on Marian Stubatinsky's approaches to things. In this case, I've got echo and iris kind of control, so I can control the color and position of each one of the echo threads. That same control structure is in use in a couple of other places in Quickdraw. I have an ability to get through that through Alice Schlien's as well as from the main warp weft editor. The name draft tool is almost a game, which allows me to enter and string a sequence of characters. And as soon as I hit the return, it starts exploring the threading and treadling options. And I can keep playing with those till I get something I like. If I like a choice, I can then compare it to other ones. And whichever one I like, I can then take that back to the main editor. The tools for network treadling and threading give me tools for walking through a complex threading sequence where it would actually show me the specific treadles shot by shot. I can select where I want to be. I can also select how many threads I want to see at a time. The threading and treadling sequence are simple little tools that would allow me to scroll around and create an old school cartoon. So I wanted to print that, tape it to Loom to tell me what the threading and treadling sequence. The double width tool allows me to take a complex piece of cloth and fold it, and it will keep track of whether the fold is on the left or the right. I can do a lot of different layers. The display or multi-layer cloth tool would actually allow me to see what a piece of folded cloth looks like, so I can actually see the layers form. Warp Saver is an interesting tool that allows me to go through and look through the pattern, figure out what structures I have. I can actually change the profile, and it will change the threading diagram. So if I got a project on the loom I don't like what's coming out, I can change that. It's actually a pretty effective design tool for doing a complex project where I want to use the same warp for a number of different pieces. The Bound Weave Editor is a useful tool for working in Quickdraw. You can control things by color, and you can change exactly what you want the pattern to look like. That's gotten a lot of video usage, so there's some demand for that one. The other thing to be very useful is the view, whiff, and directory. Since Microsoft doesn't know how to draw weaving patterns, this tool will actually look through the directory and all Cascade directories, find all patterns, and draw them out in thumbnails so I can physically see a pattern that I like. As I do mouse overs, the message up on the top right-hand corner will tell me how many shafts, the name it is, and so forth. If I click on one of those, it would automatically open. Talked about Loom Help, for example. There's a series of patterns here, all of which are done on the same warp that were done with the Warp Saver. So that gives me an overview of all of the functionality in the view. The last two tools here are the zoom in and zoom out which gives me bigger boxes and little boxes of words available here, as well as the mouse scroll wheel does the same. And that gives me a walkthrough of all the various view controls.